Hey, boys and girls. How are you guys? Are you doing good? We're going to keep talking today about how we can be good people, how we can be good friends to others. Just like last week, we talked about spreading God's love and helping people, treating our neighbors and our friends and even our enemies, people that we don't necessarily like, treating them well and helping them, showing God's love. So today we are going to read a story, and it's going to tell us that lesson of how we can do that. The story we're going to read is called Enemy Pie by Derek Munson. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a tree house in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been the perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood, right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline, and I wasn't even invited. But my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood things like enemies. He told me when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. "Tell you how? I'll show you how," he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. "Enemy pie," he said, satisfied. You may be wondering exactly what is in enemy pie. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. "I will tell you this," he said. "Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies." Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kind of things, disgusting things, would I put in a pie for my enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him some earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he needed those things. I gave him the gum I'd been chewing on all morning, but he gave it right back. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was just going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. "Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good." But Dad was smart. "If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it," he said. I could tell he had made an enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad pulled the oven mitts on and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked just like a plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I really wasn't sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There is one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross, and then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on his door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. "Can you play?" I asked. He looked confused. "I'll go ask my mom," he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. "You boys stay out of trouble," she said, smiling. We rode bikes for a while, and we played on the trampoline. Then we went and made some water balloons to throw at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange. I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course I couldn't tell Dad since he had worked so hard to make his enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop at home, but he didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back at him. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed up over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her in. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in... "Can we go in it?" he asked. I knew he was going to ask me that. But he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list. And my enemies are not allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang. And he did have me over for lunch and let me play with this trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. "Okay," I said, "but hold on." I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear at first. Then he came up to get us. We tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut the pie into 8 thick slices. "Dad," I said, "it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood." I was trying to get his attention and tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. "Wow," Jeremy said, looking at the pie. "My dad never makes pie like this." It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat the enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. "Jeremy, don't eat it. I think it's poisonous or something." Jeremy's fork stopped just before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and he looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why has your dad already eaten half of it? I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all he said. I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. An enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy. I hope you guys liked that story. I know it was a little long, so hopefully you listened to the whole thing and figured out that his dad was kind of tricking him. There is not really an enemy pie. He was just making a regular pie to share with his enemy. So kind of behind that is that his dad knew that if he spent time with Jeremy, they would become friends and he would not have him as an enemy. He would like him. And so that kind of reminds us to be open-minded, to just get to know people before we judge them, to say, I don't like that person. See maybe if you can spend some time with them, give them a shot. You might find out you got a new friend. So the book was called Enemy Pie, and they ate pie in it. And because next week is Thanksgiving, I thought maybe you guys would have some pie. Is anybody eat pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving? That's one of my favorites at Thanksgiving time. Another thing that we do in my family besides eat pie is we go around the table and we say what we're thankful for. Has anybody ever done that before? It's a good time to do that. Although, we should really thank God every day for the things we have. But especially at Thanksgiving, we kind of think about what we're all thankful for and how God has really helped us. So sometimes it's hard to think of those things, and you really think, I'm thankful for my friends and family. That's kind of the easy ones, but what else are you thankful for? There's lots of things, and they can be little things that happen every day, things that you like. So if you guys aren't too bored from listening to me read, I'm going to read one more thing for Thanksgiving here. It's a poem. It's called Let's Give Thanks for 100 Things. And this was a poem that one of my boys learned in school. But I thought it was pretty good, so we saved it. So it's called Let's Give Thanks for 100 Things. Let's give thanks for 100 things, the flowers that blooms and the birds that sing, for the sun that shines, for the rain that drops, for ice cream, for raisins and lollipops. Let's give thanks for the gift of time, for clocks that tick and the bells that chime, for days gone by and for future cheers, for seasons, moments, hours, and years. Thanks for the people who give life pizzazz, for folks who play sports, those who act and those who play jazz, for friends and family, for folks of all races, for hands that give, and for bright smiling faces. Thanks for the planet we call our home, for the sky with its clouds and its ocean's white foam, for creatures, for critters, for lakes, falls, and fountains, for hills and valleys, for canyons and mountains. Let's give thanks for 100 things, for autumn, for pumpkins, and for dragonfly wings, for Thanksgiving dinners, for seasides and shores, for 100 things and 1,000 more. I hope you guys have a good Thanksgiving. Hopefully you get to have some pumpkin pie and some turkey and spend some time with your family. I hope you guys get a chance to go around the table and say the things you're thankful for. And remember that every day. Maybe before you go to bed at night, just think about 3 things that happened in your day or 3 things that you're just thankful for, and tell them to each other. Just a reminder, there's going to be no Sunday school next week because of Thanksgiving. But we'll see you back in 2 weeks, and have a great Thanksgiving. Bye.